Everybody knows Pac-Man. We're only 5 seconds into the video and I'm sure everybody has already seen the screen and said Pac-Man. The little yellow pizza slice is easily up there with Donkey Kong and Frogger as the grandpappies of gaming, which really isn't surprising considering the original cabinet sold 100,000 units in America alone, breaking the pre-existing record of 70,000 units set by Asteroids. And sure, Pac-Mania might have passed some time ago, but the character is still around and kicking in games like Smash. Of course nobody's forgotten Pac-Man, you're probably thinking. He's iconic. But what if I told you that someone equally as revolutionary has already been forgotten? That video game's first lady has become lost in the maze of time. Who? Miss Pac-Man. That's right, the first playable female in video games, and she hasn't been an active figure in the industry for years, made even worse by her sexualized design and objectified role. Despite the trend toward decreased sexualization of female characters that Lynch is adamant to reveal in their essay, Miss Pac-Man has fallen behind. Why is that? First, let's go back a little bit. When Toru Iwatani, the creator of the then named Pac-Man, was first envisioning his character, he wanted to come up with a comical game women could enjoy. To Iwatani, the multitude of violent games meant that there were no games that everyone could enjoy, and especially none for women. And he succeeded. Studies found that the 1980s Pac-Man had brought in a diverse market of people, including women. In fact, a consumer's guide even showed that there seemed to be a 60-40 split in the game's appeal between the two sexes, with the 60 in the women's favor. The game having been such a success was already a surprise, but even more shocking was the statement that Midway spokesman Stan Jarocki made regarding their debt to lady arcaders and the creation of a game as thanks. Miss Pac-Man was released January 13, 1982 to almost immediate success, selling 115,000 cabinets and becoming the most successful American-made arcade game up to that point. In many ways, the game was ahead of its time. Maybe not for graphics, but it pushed against many of the tropes that still permeate games designed for girls, without even knowing it. For one, Miss Pac-Man is the undeniable lead protagonist. Though Pac-Man makes appearances in the intermissions, he doesn't intrude on her spotlight. Yet, the comparison between the two characters actually works in Miss Pac-Man's favor. Her game is nearly identical to the original Pac-Man, and so are her capabilities as a character. Whereas Amanda Cote argues that games designed for women relied heavily on traditionally feminine material, Miss Pac-Man's gameplay is devoid of these concepts, despite being directed toward a female audience. The in-game appearance of Miss Pac-Man also helps to combat these stereotypes. Miss Pac-Man's sprite didn't have any sexualization merely because it logistically couldn't happen. Lynch even discusses how games with lower graphics, or in this case, pixelated graphics, were less sexualized. They believed it was technological improvements such as computer graphics that facilitated the generation of more anthropomorphic bodies, and along with that development, the sexualization of characters. So, in role and in appearance, Miss Pac-Man is devoid of any sexism. Right? Well, not quite. Like I said, Pac-Man does show up in a few brief intermissions, and these tell the story of how Miss Pac-Man became Ms. Pac-Man and had a child. While not the focus of the game, rewarding the player with Miss Pac-Man's role of a mother plays into Cote's point that developers use domestic feminine ideals like raising children. But her appearance still combats sexism, right? Well, maybe in-game. However, her actual advertised appearance is just a bit more sexualized. A player might think she looks like this, but instead, she looks like this. Or this. Or this. These sexy designs were even plastered all over the arcade cabinet, so a player would be forced to recognize the overly sexualized version of Miss Pac-Man as the character they controlled. Miss Pac-Man being presented as a pinup girl is certainly not proof towards the feminist icon that her in-game actions lead her to be. So why does she look like this, when Pac-Man is shown looking like this? Or like this? It's likely that Midway and NAMCO used this sexualization as a marketing tactic, employing the idea that sex sells. Certainly, Lynch's description of prominent breasts and emphasized buttocks fit this depiction. even if it's strange for that to apply for a yellow circle. So yeah, Miss Pac-Man's origin had its problems, but it was far and away better than its competition. It's important to remember that these issues could honestly be chalked up to the game's release date. With the benefit of time, most characters would become gradually less sexualized, just as Lynch argues. And that was almost the case with Miss Pac-Man, as she did end up getting another main starring video game 18 years later. To her credit, she is portrayed very heroically, saving a damsel of her own and sporting a much less sexualized design than before. She is even characterized as feisty when she is captured in the main Pac-Man games. But that's just the issue. She is captured. Other than the one game she takes the primary lead in, Miss Pac-Man is relegated to the stereotypical role of a domestic housewife. She exists only as a damsel for Pac-Man to rescue. In spite of her success, Miss Pac-Man becomes a victim of benevolent sexism. And the worst part? Miss Pac-Man would lead one last game in 2001 before forever being sidelined. From that point, she would only occasionally appear in Pac-Man games before she was forgotten altogether. Whereas other characters from the arcade period would go on to grow into fully realized characters separated from sexist connotations, Miss Pac-Man's lack of, existing left her growth staggered. For all that the world knew, Miss Pac-Man would never grow into the proper feminist icon that she deserved to be. Then, unbelievably, her story did actually end. I'm not kidding either. Meet Pac-Mom, her replacement. Thanks to a lawsuit concerning royalties for using Miss Pac-Man's likeness, NAMCO quietly decided that the character be retired. Moving forward, Miss Pac-Man would quite literally be replaced by Pac-Mom's character in any remastered classic. The unceremonious change would also come with a major problem for the character. Unlike her counterpart, Pac-Mom does not resist any sexist stereotypes. In the same scenes that show Miss Pac-Man fighting against her capture, Pac-Mom instead succumbs completely to her role as a damsel, a role that is only further emphasized by her name, forever marking her in the domestic life like a branding iron. The spindly legs and high heels tie this character back to the pinup arts that Miss Pac-Man had begun to move away from. Worst of all, Pac-Mom doesn't have any primary roles. The character has been stripped of her protagonism. In a way, Pac-Mom represents all of the stereotypes that Miss Pac-Man was created to fight against. Though Miss Pac-Man was created to appeal towards the untapped female market, Pac-Mom falls into line as yet another female character defined by her relationship to the male lead. Lynch's essay might show a progressive decline of female sexualization, but Miss Pac-Man's legacy is denied the right to walk this path.